Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. I'm glad you're here. Happy Valentine's Day. Coming up in honor of Valentine's Day, we're going to talk with a C.S. Lewis scholar about the four loves and also about C.S. Lewis's marriage to his wife Joy. It was a very unique and interesting relationship they had. So we got that all coming up. But first, I want to talk about the campaign in general here, the Democrats in general. I just can't get over it. It's awesome. And I want to keep talking about it because it's so great. I loved the clip we played, I think it was yesterday, of Trump saying, this was back in 2018 actually, this clip, but he said, I love these candidates. I dream of these people. They're unbelievable. He loves them so much. Then he goes on this whole stand-up bit about Pocahontas. And it's fantastic. I hope she stays in the race just for the jokes. Trump is going to joyfully bound his way through this campaign. And the Democrats are in a embarrassing position right now. Charlie Kirk made a good point that 28 diverse candidates started out this race for the Democrats. They're down to 8, 7 white people, 5 men, 4 millionaires, 2 billionaires, and 4 people in their 70s. And this is who the Democrats have chosen to represent the party of youth, income inequality, and diversity. It's a pretty sad state. Read an article the other day from a Democrat. He wrote this article in the Daily Beast. This was right after New Hampshire. This is what he said. He said, I remember when this used to be an exciting day, election day, voting day. Even if my candidate didn't win, which they usually didn't, I loved both the reliable rituals and the unexpected little accidents. He says, if memory serves, and the video doesn't seem to be online, which is a bummer, I recall Illinois Senator Paul Simon saying during his concession speech in 1988 that our platform is strong. Right before the riser he was standing on collapsed, which would be awesome. But he goes on, he says, well, it's not exciting now. It's depressing. I'm depressed. Almost everybody I know is depressed. It's a mess. Iowa's a blank show and shouldn't be first anyway. New Hampshire shouldn't be second. It's totally preposterous. Yet the party lacks the stones to tell these self-important second-tier states to go stuff it. The candidates don't look like winners. The party looks like it might be headed towards a face-off between a billionaire and a man who wants to ban billionaires. Neither of them really Democrats. That's actually true. Bloomberg's not really a Democrat, and Bernie is an independent. He caucuses with the Democrats, but neither of those guys are Democrats. And Donald Trump is going to be reelected. It's amazing, like this idea, like what a surreal moment we're in that Bloomberg is going to be the savior of the Democratic Party. Bloomberg, the other day, earlier in the week, Bloomberg's comments about stop and frisk from the past came out. No black Democrats are going to vote for Mike Bloomberg, and no blacks are going to vote for Buttigieg. He had his own major controversy in South Bend, crime-infested, one of the most dangerous cities in the country, South Bend. Police officers shot a black man, Eric Logan. So he's had his own hands up, don't shoot controversy that he handled horribly. Buttigieg did. And Trump's just going to ride this all. Trump tweeted out the other day, he said, wow, Bloomberg's a total racist. He's just going to tweet that. So Bloomberg's, well, I'll tell you what. So Trump had 2 great tweets the other day. He said, Mini Mike is a 5'4" mass of dead energy who does not want to be on the debate stage with these professional politicians. No boxes, please. He hates Bernie and will, with enough money, possibly stop him. Bernie's people will go nuts. Trump's going to do this game for the next, couple months, where he's going to keep calling out the media and the Democratic establishment for knocking down Bernie. And he's going to try to lift up Bernie throughout the next couple months. So you'll see more tweets like that, like this sort of support of Bernie and his movement. But check out this tweet. Mini Mike Bloomberg's a loser who has money but can't debate and has zero presence. You will see. He reminds me of a tiny version of Jeb low-energy Bush, but Jeb has more political skill and has treated the black community much better than Mini. By the way, before we get back to the black community part, that's why I bring that tweet up. This Mini thing, this tiny Mike, gets to Mike Bloomberg. So Bloomberg's campaign comes back with all this super blowhardy, the only size that Bloomberg cares about is the size of the debt or whatever. Come on, give me a break. But this actually gets to him, these height comments. I forget the New York Times reporter, Maggie Haberman maybe, said she used to cover Bloomberg back when he was mayor, and this bothers him. People talking about how short he is. And Trump's just going to keep tweeting out pictures of him with I've seen a lot of pictures. I've seen way more pictures in my entire life of Mike Bloomberg and like short and then two tall women, like models around him that make him just look like a little dwarf. So Trump's going to tweet out tons of pictures like that. And apparently he lied on his driver's license about how tall or how short he actually is. But anyway, the reason I bring that up is because the line about black voters. Jeb treated black community much better than Minnie. It's an amazing, so that ties into what we've been saying a lot lately about how Trump's going to get a record percentage of the black vote. I've been saying 10 to 15%. It could even be high as 30%, especially if Bloomberg is the guy that they're going to be putting up. This is the amazing thing the Democrats have done. They've involuntarily done this. 2 days ago, we talked about Clarence Thomas and how he lived a portion of his life consumed with anger, right? Remember this? And we made the point that living with anger will destroy your life. And if you're angry at someone or something for long enough, you become that thing you hate. That anger is so all-consuming that you become the thing you hate because it's all you think about. And the Democrats for these last 3-4 years have had so much anger towards Trump, they've become Trump. So this guy's on Twitter, his name's Carpe Doncum. He makes a ton of memes that the president uses. And he sent this out the other day, and I think this is so right on. We're going to use this as the basis for our analysis moving forward here. Check this out. He said, I just had an epiphany. Joe Biden is quite literally the embodiment of what Democrats believe Donald Trump is, but isn't. Biden is a corrupt, bitter, creepy old man with dementia, a man with below average intelligence and thin skin who lashes out at anyone that questions him. He yells at women, calls people names, challenges them to physical contests, or threatens to beat them up. He has old ties to racism that he covers with, I got a ton of black friends. His family's a mess, and he's constantly lying about his accomplishments. He would probably actually start World War III. His foreign policy is a joke. He's probably owned by the Russians and the Chinese. The Democratic Party is literally running their own projection of Trump. And it makes perfect sense. Again, if they've been consumed by this anger for so long, they've now become that thing. So they have their own version of Trump. But it's not really Trump. It's their own version of what they think Trump is. But Trump's not those things. And Bloomberg's the same thing, being a billionaire, right? So they criticize Trump for being out of touch. Trump's not out of touch. We've talked before about how Trump, the greatest connections with Trump are, the doorman and the garbage man and the cab drivers and the people who work at his hotels, right? So he's definitely not out of touch. But the Democrats kept running this whole thing like Trump's a billionaire, he's out of touch, he's out of touch, he's out of touch. So then they run Mike Bloomberg, who is the most out of touch of all. Are you kidding me? And then they say, Trump's a racist, Trump's a racist, Trump's a racist. So then they run Mike Bloomberg. All these clips come out of him needing to stop and frisk black people. Geez, I don't think either of those guys are actually racist. But if you're going to use the left's modern definition of racism, then Bloomberg's way more racist than Trump ever. For the next 200, so does that make sense? They're running their own projection of Trump. So for the next 260 days or whatever it is, Trump is just going to keep picking these guys off one by one. And so he's going to pick these guys off and then reunite military families for the nation to see in the meantime. Amazing. It's getting to the point, right now I'm very happy about the current situation. But if it keeps going this way, have you ever been to a stand-up comedy, open mic night? And someone gets up there and bombs, just bombs, and you feel bad for them. You know what I mean? After a while, you're like, this has got to stop. I feel I feel bad. I'm kind of sick. Like someone end this misery. I'm getting pretty close to that. I might get to the point where I'm going to start feeling bad for these Democrat candidates. Make it stop. Can we just vote now so it can end for them? I feel bad. And then once I start to feel bad, Elizabeth Warren goes and does something like this. Have you heard this? Sorry, let me set up real quick. This is Elizabeth Warren's latest made-up story. When I say made-up story, I'm not making it up. She's making it up. She was asked about, is her campaign going to go all the way to the end? Here's what she said.
Because I am concerned. But Claire, I tell you, there are so many people who are in this fight for all the right reasons. You know me, did the speech, and then afterwards did a selfie line, and we were there for over an hour. People are coming through, and they're saying thank you, and they're giving hugs and talking about what's important to them. A young woman came up by herself, and she said, I'm a broke college student with a lot of student loan debt. And she said, I checked and I have $6 in the bank. So I just gave $3 to keep you in this fight. That's what we got to do. We got to stay in this fight with people who are counting on us. This isn't about fighting other Democrats. This is about fighting for the America we believe in.
Unbelievable. The worst part about that is she tweeted that video out. She put that, like her campaign tweeted that out as like a heroic story. They tweeted it out with a young girl came up to me tonight and said, I'm a broke college student with a lot of student loan debt. I checked and I have $6 in the bank. So I just gave $3 to keep you in this fight. We're staying in this fight for the people who are counting on. Like she tweeted that out. That's a horrible story. The story she just said, that's horrible. Warren's net worth is $12 million. You should give that $3 back. You should. Derek Hunter, he wrote on Twitter, he said, you're a millionaire. Why the blank are you taking $3 from someone who only has $6? What kind of monster are you? Isn't that amazing? Like what a clown move that is. You should give her $3 and then give her like 20 more. Like, because for food, if she only has $6 and she just gave you half of her net worth. So what Warren did there, she tried to put a twist on the classic story of the little girl who put up a lemonade stand. And the little girl, she raised enough money and she decided to donate her $12 to a homeless charity. And the local news picks up the story and shows the cute little girl on TV and everyone's heart is warmed. So Elizabeth Warren, she took that story and she changed all the nouns. So instead of it being a little 7-year-old girl, it's a woman. It's a college student woman, even though Warren still called her a young girl, right? So it's a woman. And instead of raising money with a lemonade stand, this adult is crushed by student loan debt that she probably shouldn't have taken on. And instead of giving the money to the homeless, she gave it to a millionaire and her obviously failing presidential campaign. So it's a funny thing. When you change around all the nouns and all the variables of that story's not so sweet anymore. It's actually really sad. I can't believe she would tweet, like, how out of touch is that you would think that that's a heroic tale? I mean, in all seriousness, that woman is financially irresponsible. She spent half of her very limited assets on a momentary feeling of pleasure, I guess. That's probably why she's broke in the first place. But again, look at me acting like that story even ever happened. Because the truth is that didn't. They're just floundering. They're looking for something. They got nothing. And it's fun. It's fun for now, but pretty soon it's going to be like, ugh, just put them out of their misery already. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Slater Crusaders, we're going to talk to Jessica Vaughn about this new piece of legislation that's it's insane. Remember the Green New Deal a couple months ago when that first came out? They've upped it. They've upped the ante here. But it's not about global warming. It's about immigration. It's called the New Way Forward Act. And 1/5 of the Democratic caucus has signed on to this. So let's talk about this craziness with Jessica Vaughn from the Center for Immigration Studies. Ms. Vaughn, how are you?
Doing well, thanks.
So there's a lot to this, the New Way Forward Act. I don't know where to begin. Where should we start with this thing? What is it?
Well, this is as unworkable as the Green New Deal and will cost taxpayers plenty of greenbacks. The purpose of this bill is essentially to get rid of immigration enforcement as we know it. And not only that, apply it retroactively to people who have been deported over the last 10 years or so, maybe even more. The idea is to have it so that being in the country illegally is no longer illegal unless you happen to commit a very serious crime, and only that small fraction of the illegal alien population that has committed the worst of the worst types of crimes would be subject to deportation.
So if my understanding is right, it's if you committed a crime and you're sentenced to something longer than 5 years, you can be deported, but anything less than that, you wouldn't be. Is that correct?
That's right. And it's not just sentenced to 5 years. You would have to have actually served 5 years in prison before you would be subject to deportation. So, you could have, be committing multiple misdemeanors every week of your life, and that would not be enough to get you deported. Or if you were sentenced to 4 years and, 200 days, that wouldn't be enough to get you deported. You could be deported or have been deported 10 times before, and you would be allowed to come back and be here illegally under the new rules. And not only that, the U.S. government, or maybe I should say U.S. taxpayers, will buy you a plane ticket to come back here. And it's a giant...
What?
Well, the point behind this for the 44 members of the U.S. House who have sponsored this is that they believe that immigration laws are inherently unjust and a violation of everyone's human rights. So they want to make it possible for people to get here illegally and just stay. And in fact, the bill says if you manage to stay here for 5 years without getting caught, then it's a giant rolling amnesty. And if you got deported under the old laws, then they want to give everyone a chance to come back and be subject to this new law, which means they're not subject to the law anymore. They're allowed to stay because they're under the assumption that their prior deportation was somehow unjust.
Whoa. Okay, hold on. So let's say, how retroactively far back does it go?
I don't remember exactly how far back, but under current law, nothing is retroactive. If the law changes, it's going forward in most cases. But it's crazy to try to rewrite history. But this is what that's the approach that these sponsors take to almost everything. Is that it's up to them to rewrite history. They want to bring people back.
So let me give you a scenario, just so I make sure I get this right before I go telling people about this. So let's say someone, illegal immigrant from Guatemala, comes up to America 10 years ago, breaks a bunch of laws, serves 4 years in prison, got deported. 5 years ago, got deported. If this law were to pass, we would find that guy or something, or he would apply to come back or something. We'd fly him back. And I'd pay for his ticket. I'd fly him back into America, and then what? Then let him free, and he just tries again.
That's right. Under the terms of this bill,
That's right.
People who were deported, and most of them are criminals because 90% of ICE's workload for the last 10 years has been criminals. They would be allowed to petition to have their case reopened and would be entitled to a U.S. government-funded plane ticket or other transportation back into the United States. And you can bet there will be a bunch of lawyers who will be recruiting people south of the border to represent them and get back into the United States. And it basically gives them another bite at the apple. It would allow them to come before a judge and say, I was deported X number of years ago, and I'm no longer deportable because of this new law, the new way forward, and can I stay? And the judges would have to follow the law and say, yes, you qualify for this retroactive amnesty because the rules have changed and old deportation orders are no longer valid. And, welcome to America. It's a great country.
Wow. Okay. All right.
It's almost a parody of, you just couldn't make this up. But they've introduced it and it has 44 co-sponsors.
Yeah, that's way, way, way too many co-sponsors. So on that point, let's back it up a little bit. So on that point, it's not going to, well, I don't think it would pass the House, right? And no way would it pass the Senate, and no way would the president sign this. So it's easy to brush this aside and just say, oh, this is some goofy, Ilhan Omar thing, whatever. Why does this matter? Why is this important?
Well, it is crazy. And I think objectively, most voters and most members of Congress would find it to be crazy. But the importance of this goes beyond the bill itself. What it does is establish a new baseline or starting point for negotiations for any kind of legislation that might be introduced in Congress. Let's say, for example, the Senate were to pass an immigration reform bill negotiated with the White House that would be something that most people could get behind, and it's moderate and reasonable. That would then go to the House of Representatives, and the Democrats would say, well, no, this is what we want, the new way forward, and the expectation would be that they would split the difference and come up with a sort of compromise with the Senate. But this is so far off the charts, it kind of moves the needle as to where the middle point is, enabling, they hope, the Democrats hope, to get more of what they really want, which is a massive amnesty for people already here, the ability to bring some people back for another bite at the apple, just, as much as they can get. This is the art of the deal, Democrat style, is just propose something so wild and try to get as much as they can.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so it sets this crazy anchor and kind of moves the Overton window a little bit there.
And it'll be politicians to go back to their districts, the ones who sponsored it, and say, look what I'm trying to do for everyone. And, they think that there's some political advantage that they have in their districts for being a part of this, no matter how crazy other people think it is.
What is your philosophical approach to borders and why we should have them, why they should be enforced? So like yours, and then on the flip side, like any one of these Democrats, like what do they think about border? What do you, beyond like, because I know the more cynical part of me would be like, oh, they just want Democratic voters. But even like deeper than that, like philosophically, what do they think about borders and what do you think about borders?
Well, there definitely are some politicians that do this for some perceived political gain. But there also is a component of the Democrats and probably some Republicans too, who have a more ideological approach. And their belief is that borders are obsolete, that the United States can absorb an unlimited, infinite number of new immigrants, that immigrants make our country better. And we should, we have some kind of obligation to the rest of the world to admit as many people as possible. And business interests want an endless supply of labor so that the wages they have to pay go down. Our approach is that, no, indeed, we do need borders to not only to protect our country, because we may think that we're letting in just a lot of hardworking, good people, and many of them are. But when we have an open border, that enables criminal organizations to take advantage of those open borders to further their criminal goals. And really, illegal immigration is a giant organized crime enterprise, but that borders are important to our sovereignty as well. And while we would like to be able to help people in the world, really the best way to do that is to help them succeed in their own country, because letting everyone in here has a negative impact on Americans and on legal immigrants. And we cherish a tradition of legal immigration, but we can't have that if the rules are not enforced. It's meaningless. So we need it for our sovereignty and so that we can survive as a country to help other countries, if they want our help, become a place where people want to stay.
Yeah, it's the word obligation is interesting. So I watched, there's a clip of Ayanna Pressley, one of the members of the squad yesterday, saying the Constitution is an inherently sexist document against women, and women are in many places still shackled, still in chains. Good to see that your husband let you out of your shackles for this interview, Jessica. And it's so weird, like, if we're such a horrible racist, the worst place in the world, yet you got to come here. Everyone should be coming here. Come on in. You'd think they'd be building a wall to keep everyone out if it was such a terrible place to be. So this idea that we have an obligation to accept people is an interesting thought. Let me throw you this, Jessica. Last question. What do you say to my belief that we are amazing and immigrants have done amazing things for our country, and we are a nation of immigrants, blah, blah, all that stuff. So what do you say to that in light of this conversation?
Well, that's it. I mean, people like Presley and her co-squad members think that immigration enforcement and immigration laws are inherently racist and against others around the world, and that bringing in more people from around the world, they say, will make our country a better place. Like, they don't like the Americans who are already here, apparently. They want to replace them with new Americans. And that is not something that most Americans would subscribe to. We don't want to see our country and our sovereignty and our economic success wiped off the face of the earth. It's a way of preserving our sovereignty. But I think, ultimately, sometimes they talk, maybe they do have these beliefs about, that bringing in immigrants will make us, would fundamentally change us to make us a different country and a better country. I do think that sometimes that is a cover for what is really patronage politics and basically wanting to increase the number of people who are likely to vote for them and keep them in power and further their political agenda and replace the people who disagree with them.
Yep, I always say if these immigrants coming across were voting Republican, then you would see Nancy Pelosi with brick and mortar running to the border to build that wall as fast as possible. Jessica, we got to run. What is the website for the Center for Immigration Studies?
Everything we do is at cis.org.
Perfect, wonderful. Jessica, appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Good talking with you.
The New Way Forward Act. Unfortunately, that is a true story. Mike Slater Show. Spread the word. Slater Crusaders, happy Valentine's Day. I'm glad you're here. I want to take this, my wife's hopefully not listening right now, goofy holiday, and turn it into something a little more meaningful here. And I want to do that by talking about C.S. Lewis with a C.S. Lewis scholar and speaker, Andrew Lazo. Mr. Lazo, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Mike. How about yourself?
Really good. I'm glad you're here. So I wanted to talk about the four loves, and I was just reminded a couple minutes ago that there was a Super Bowl commercial with the four loves, and I kind of forgot that, but that's so people maybe are a little more familiar with the four loves than maybe they were as of 2 weeks ago. But as I'm learning more about you, I came across another book of his, Till We Have Faces, and I call myself a C.S. Lewis fan. I've never even heard of that book. So before we get into the four loves, what is Till We Have Faces?
So Till We Have Faces is the last novel. Here, I got a copy right here. It's Lewis's last novel, and he calls it Far and Away My Best Book. Or another place he says, Much My Best Book. But my one great disappointment with the critics. And so it's a retelling, appropriately enough today, of the Cupid and Psyche myth. And he writes it as he's getting to know his future wife, Joy Davidman. And in fact, in the more than dozen years I've spent working on this book, I've come to discover that while they were writing it in the spring of 1955, Davidman, who was already in love with Lewis and writing love poems to him, Lewis actually falls in love with her while they are composing this book together.
Wow, very good. So you told me before we went on that Till We Have Faces was the four loves, but people didn't get it, so then he had to be more explicit for people like me and actually write the four loves. Is that right?
I think so. I think what he was trying to do, he said right around the same year that he wrote this book, he said that his job now was not to write so much direct theology, but to catch the reader on a way of fiction and symbol. And I think that's what he's doing, but he caught the reader, I think, a little too unawares. So the first line of the book, the protagonist says, "I am old now and have not much to fear the anger of gods. I have no husband, no friend, nor hardly even no husband, no son, nor hardly even a friend through whom they can hurt me." So husband is eros, child is storge, family love. Eros is a husband, philia is a friend, and then agape is the love of the gods. And so for the whole length of the book, you have this woman talking about the opposite of love, almost in the way that Screwtape would do. So
Yeah.
I think
Let's break those four
Lewis
down.
wrote it out.
Let's break those four down. Which one do you want to start with?
Sure. Well, let's start the way that Lewis started. Let's start with storge, which is a familial love. It's kind of built in. You're kind of born into it. It's the reason why you still have people from high school on your social media, even though you're not friends. You're not going to hang out. It's the same kind of love we have for our nation. It's what we have anytime we kind of join an organization accidentally. So built in like family love. And there's certainly great love that develops around it. But it's not necessarily the most intense of all the loves. But Lewis says 90% of the solid happiness in this world come from storge, which he also called affection.
So would this be like friends at work?
Exactly, although I'm not sure Lewis would even call them friends. So if you've got a group of folks from work and you get together on Sundays to watch football, or you go out for a drink or go out for a meal, if two or three of you have another interest that's really deep seated and you kind of slip off to talk about your interest, and I don't care if that's knitting or NASCAR or literature, whatever. The people who are friends are actually joined by a really deep-seated shared interest. Lewis says that friends consider the same questions important, even if they disagree violently on the answers. So storge is kind of the group that you're in. Friends are the ones that go, yeah, go ahead.
No, so I say, so friends and storge, those are different even.
Those are different. So storge or affection, that's kind of like the love that you feel for your family. It's the love that you feel for your country. When you see somebody overseas and you hear them speaking English, you rush to them and you have a connection. That's storge. If the heartstrings pull when you hear your old fight song, that's storge. But philia, Lewis says, is two people standing shoulder to shoulder, thinking about the same thing the same way.
Can you give examples of that, philia?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the first day that Lewis meets J.R.R. Tolkien is in 1926. And he comes home and records in his diary that there was no harm in Tolkien. He only needed a smack or so. But that friendship developed past wanting to smack each other. And Lewis and Tolkien soon discovered that they loved Norse myth. And so they got together to talk about Norse myth. They loved dragons and dwarves and all of this. And that became the basis of their friendship. They talked about the thing that they deeply loved. Lewis says friends kind of don't look so much at the friendship as the object of their friendship, if that makes sense.
Huh. That last sentence you said almost, in my eyes, like cheapens the connection between the two people by making it less on each other and more on the object. Is that fair or no?
I think it's fair. I think that friends spend little time looking at their relationship because they would prefer to talk about the good stuff. My best friend and I talk about the right guitar solos on the right records from back in our high school days, and that's the real important stuff. And when you find somebody who shares your deepest loves and considers the things that you spend the most time on really important, I mean, we're shy about those things that we love the deepest. Luke says that we often kind of separate ourselves from the crowd because we're almost embarrassed that we love this thing so much. But when we find another that loves it that same way, and then a third or a fourth, man, that's the moment that friendship is born. Lewis says the key phrase is, "Oh, you too? You like that too?" And that's when friendship starts.
Interesting. Okay, give me eros.
Eros. So great. If friends are shoulder to shoulder looking at the same things the same way, and they essentially want to talk about the passion that they share, not necessarily the relationship, Lewis says that lovers are face to face, right? Lovers want to go on thinking about each other, want to go on thinking about the relationship. That's why when people say, "Oh, we're just friends," they're probably neither friends nor lovers.
Oh, wait, explain that one. What does that mean?
Well, a lot of times, when somebody has a crush on somebody else and they're going to settle for friendship, but when you ask these people who are kind of on the way in or on the way out of a dating relationship, what passions or interests they share, usually they don't really share anything that's, really deep-seated
Yes.
from the heart. So it's those
Yeah, that makes
values
perfect
that
sense.
you share, that's friendship, right?
Is
Friend
Eros
and
can go ahead, sorry.
yeah. No, go ahead. Is Eros?
I was gonna say, can Eros be a lasting thing, or is it by its nature a passionate, fleeting thing?
See, what Lewis says is that Eros begins kind of in attraction. Sometimes that's physical and sexual. A lot of times that's romantic. When you fall in love, it's usually the emotional component rather than the physical that you're that you're looking for first. And the Eros will still be there, but especially today, you've got all kinds of ads about how to spark that old flame. And who really wants to feel the sweaty palms and the sick in the stomach of the initial falling in love? Who wants to feel that for the rest of your life? You need some of the other loves, I think, to kind of join in to Eros, to make it rich and full and lifelong. And Lewis certainly experienced that with Joy Davidman. In fact,
Yeah.
he said of his wife that began by being friends. And in the Four Loves, he says that friends who find themselves on the same road, considering the same questions important, when they're of the opposite sex and not loved anywhere else and attracted to each other, friendship often will change even within the first half hour into Eros or romantic love. And that's certainly what happened with Lewis and Joy Davidman. They were friends for years. She fell in love with him, and then he realized that he had fallen in love with her. So he gets both loves. He gets friendship love, and then he gets Eros with her, and that was certainly a lasting love for him.
Does Eros ideally lead to agape, or is agape a totally different thing? Like, explain agape for us. I tend to put that as like the highest in the hierarchy, but I don't know if that's like, should I be thinking as like a hierarchical thing on this or no?
No, not necessarily that. What Lewis would do is divide the three natural loves and then the one divine love. Storge is familial affection. Friendship is philia, is friendship of a shared passion. Eros is romantic love. And those are the natural loves that happen to us humans. Lewis says that agape or agape is the divine love. It's the highest love. It's the love that God has for humans and that Christians have for other Christians. That's what you see in 1 Corinthians 13, that you see here at weddings. Love is faithful, love is kind, unconditional love. That's agape. That's the only kind of love God has. We humans have the three natural loves, but here's where Lewis is brilliant in the Four Loves. He says that none of these natural loves will sustain unless unselfish, divine love will come and help them. So agape comes and mixes with the other loves. Have you ever been mad at your friend or mad at your wife, yet you still were loving towards them? That's agape helping out Storge and philia and Eros.
Is agape only open to Christians? Would he argue?
I think it's probably, actually, agape, unconditional love, is what God has for every single living person. So divine love is available to anybody who will say yes to God, right? And you remember in the Great Divorce, he says there are only two kinds of people in the world: people who say to God, "Thy will be done," and people to whom God says, "Thy will be done." If we say yes to God, unconditional, eternal love is ours for the taking, no matter where we are. Amongst Christians, anytime somebody loves without any condition or expectation of return, that's usually amongst Christians. And in fact, agape was a little used word in Greek, and it was the Christians who really invested it with all kinds of meaning. And that's especially in 1 Corinthians. So the Christians really needed a word. Yeah.
My last question for you, Andrew, and we have to run here.
Sure.
Why is it important in my daily life to understand the difference between these four, right? So C.S. Lewis and you just brilliantly categorized each of them, very distinct definitions, roles in our lives, et cetera. Why is it important that I know these and live these out?
That's a great question. I think the reason that The Four Loves is the most important book that I've ever read as an adult is because it helped to set the boundary lines of relationship for me. And so I didn't expect my coworkers to become my friends, right? Because we didn't share necessarily a passion. And so being able to identify these kind of three different containers of natural love, that was hugely important. If I have a romantic relationship, but we don't share the same interest in NASCAR or quilting, that's okay. We have romantic love. We don't necessarily need friendship love. And as long as I can get friendship love outside of the romantic relationship, that's nurturing and sustaining and healthy, that's great. So it sets up the boundaries. The last reason I think that knowing these four is important is because if Jesus is right that the greatest commandment is to love God and love everyone else, if Lewis is right that love is the intolerable compliment that God pays to us, I think love is the central thing in the whole universe. And I think we need to come to terms with love. And if we're going to grapple with love, this central thing to God and all of creation, we need to know what we're talking about. Lewis says in The Four Loves that we should learn how to define and describe what we mean. And he spends the book defining and describing the most important thing, especially on today, Valentine's Day, and that's love.
Superb answer. Andrew, where should people go to learn more about you and C.S. Lewis?
Well, thanks for asking. I've got a website. It's mythoflove.net. And Myth of Love is what I'm calling my work on Till We Have Faces, C.S. Lewis and the Myth of Love. And they can find out a bunch about me if they want to have me come and speak, whatever. You can find more about me there.
Okay, I'm going to read Till We Have Love with a, oh geez, I'm going to fail this test, with a philia who we share a common interest in C.S. Lewis with. Is that right?
There you go.
Beautiful. And then
I think you should.
And then we'll talk again. Andrew Lazo, mythoflove.net. Beautiful, Andrew. We'll talk again. Thank you, brother.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Blessings.
True story. Mike Slater. More coming up. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. We'll wrap up the week with this. This is a pretty interesting data point here. Maybe it's the only data point that really matters, actually, in an election. Gallup poll found that 59% of Americans say they're better off financially today than they were a year ago. 59% better off today than a year ago. That's obviously good for Trump. Only 20% of people say they're worse off. But here's the even more important number. 74%, so much more, 74% expect that they and their family will be even better off financially next year than today, right? Does that make sense? So 59% are looking a year back, 74% are looking forward and saying, man, things are looking up. Now, a quick background on polls. As we move forward and we get closer to the election and there's a ton of polls all the time. We look at polls, I look at polls with just a grain of salt. I dismiss almost all of them. Way too many variables at play to the point where most polls are meaningless. It's all about how they ask the question, what words they emphasize in the question, what questions are asked in what order. So like what questions were asked before this question, how they word it, who they call, when they call, do you call on a home phone, do you call on cell phones? What happened in the news the day before this question was asked can affect how people answer the question. There's countless variables that can drastically change the outcome of a poll. And oftentimes the headlines don't even match the actual polling data. So I'll read a headline and then I go and you click the actual results and you're like, oh, that's like a totally different story than what the headline in the article is all about. So anyway, we take polls with a very, very small grain of salt. The only polls that I give like 2 grains of salt are the ones where they ask the same question over a long period of time. At least then you get some consistency that you can kind of look at. So this question from Gallup, which is specifically it's looking ahead, do you expect that this time next year you will be financially better off or not? No, it's financially better off or worse off than now. That's the question. So looking ahead, do you expect, I'm asking you right now, so looking ahead, do you expect that this time next year you will be financially better off or financially worse off than now? And that's when a record 74% of people said better off. The last highest was 71%. That was back in 1998. And they've been asking this question since 1976. In 1976, only 47% of people thought that they'd be better off moving forward. So this is huge. 74% of people think they're going to be better off next year. If that's true, then why would a vast majority of people vote not only against Trump, but for a completely different economic model of socialism, right? It's not just like we're going to kind of keep going down this path, but like a little bit different tax rates. It's like a totally different world. When 74% of people think we're headed on a great path financially, we're supposed to think that they're going to vote for like Bernie, who's going to completely change the entire structure of the economy. Sounds like a really tough sell, and Bernie is not a good salesman. None of these Democrats are. Dems have lost their mind. This is a clip here of Mike Bloomberg. Mini Mike wants to stand on a box. This is 2016. He's at Oxford University, and he starts off this clip saying, "We, the intelligentsia." He literally says it. He says, "We, the intelligentsia, the people who could make it into this room." He's at the business school of Oxford University. "We, the intelligentsia, the people who could make it into this room, we believe in equality and protecting individual rights." And he says that makes no sense to the vast bulk of the people. We'll pick it up here.
I don't know how many are familiar with the bathroom issue in the United States. Anybody know what I'm talking about? If you want to know, is somebody a good salesman, give them the job of going to the Midwest and picking a town and selling to that town the concept that some man wearing a dress should be in the locker room with their daughter. If you can sell that, you can sell anything. I mean, they just look at you and they say, "What on earth are you talking about?" And you say, "Well, this person identifies his or her gender as different than what's on their birth certificate." And they say, what do you mean? You're either born this or you're born that. And, you know, I will say, in our prison system in New York City, we have to have the policy when you walk in, you know, drop your trousers, you go this way, you go that way. That's it, because you can't sit there and you can't mix things in a jail. That's a practical case of where you have to make a decision. But it's so many things that we are nuanced, and the social issues that we're very proud of achieving aren't believed by the vast bulk of the people.
Oh, there you go. So the example he gives, this is not my example, I'm putting it on him. He gives the example of letting men who identify as a man who identifies as a woman into your daughter's bathroom. He presents that as a nuanced issue, an issue that we are very proud of. But then he goes on and says, "Hey, Democrats, good luck selling that to the uneducated bigots like you watching right now." So think about that. Like, the Democrats, they can't make an economic argument why they're better than Trump or what we're doing right now. 74%, a record number of Americans think they're going to be better off in the next year than this year, and things are only getting better. So the Democrats can't say, "Vote for us, we're going to bring in a socialist revolution." No one wants that. And they can't fight on social issues because the social issues that they've grabbed onto are transgender rights. Is letting men in the girls' locker room in Wisconsin. Note, in that clip, he mentioned people in the Midwest. Did you catch that in the beginning? He said, "Good luck selling that to people in the Midwest." So sorry, Midwesterners, you now have to suffer from the same geographical bigotry that the South has been on the receiving end for the last few decades. You're now going to be talked down to by the intelligentsia and the people wise enough to be in that room, listening to the great Mike Bloomberg. So you're going to be talked down to by the intelligentsia for being so socially backwards that you don't want men in your daughter's bathroom. You aren't sophisticated enough in your thinking to understand the nuance of their arguments. So get ready, Midwesterners, to be talked down to by your superiors. Mini Mike leading the way. But he'd have to stand on a really tall box to talk down to you. He's very short. George Orwell has by the way, he's very short, and I did not know that until like a week ago when President Trump told us. George Orwell has a line. He has a book, I guess you call it, called Notes on Nationalism. 1945, he wrote it. And the line is, one has to belong to the intelligentsia to believe things like that. No ordinary man could be such a fool. You may have heard the line. It's often translated as, there's some ideas so wrong, so crazy, that only an intellectual could believe them. That's a paraphrase of that line from George Orwell. And the poor Democrats, they got nothing. They got nothing. There's nothing. What are they doing? What are they going to do? There's no winning message at all. This is Senator Scott. He was talking about economic zones, that he was a part of. Trump mentioned this in the State of the Union speech, these economic zones. So here he's talking about economic growth in America.
The president is focusing his laser on the most vulnerable people. And frankly, that makes the Democrats lose their minds. There's a meme with a brain that explodes. That's what happens when President Trump starts talking about bringing back more resources to the most vulnerable folks, when he starts talking about the lowest Hispanic unemployment rate, when he starts talking about the highest increase in wages came from the poorest Americans who are working. The story of the American comeback is a story that starts at the most vulnerable, fragile people on the economic ladder and moves up.
Yeah, he's right. Every time the president talks about the most vulnerable, lowest income minorities, the left freaks out because that's their pile of votes. You can't, right? Democrats are saying you can't come in and actually help these people. You can't talk to these people. This is our space. So we can keep making promises that we're not going to fulfill, so that we can keep passing legislation that will make these people worse off. Good example of that would be the New Way Forward Act. I think people living in the city want the New Way Forward Act to pass. So we're going to pass these legislations that hurt these very people that we've trapped them, we've tricked them into the voting force. How dare you give low-income kids opportunities to go to school that they want to? How dare you lower taxes in certain areas to incentivize business investment? How dare you pass criminal justice reform? This is our pile of votes. I'll end here. Alice Johnson. Remember her? 64-year-old black woman. She was serving a life sentence. She was the feature of Trump's Super Bowl ad. So remember, Kim Kardashian championed her cause, and then Trump commuted her sentence, and now she's sort of the face of criminal justice reform for the president. Do you remember the Super Bowl ad? She didn't know that she was going to be the centerpiece of that ad. She heard like a week before that she might be in the ad, which was like a second, but she didn't think she would be the ad. And she was actually in Miami randomly when watching that ad. She doesn't live in Miami, but she happened to be there where the Super Bowl was. Anyway, she was cornered by the New York Times and asked how she feels about being a pawn in the president's game. How does she like being lied to and used as a prop by this racist president? And she said, I don't feel like a prop. To have criminal justice reform as the centerpiece of the Super Bowl ad, that lifts everyone up in this arena. I've been such a source of pride for him. Remember, this is the woman who said, thank you, Donald John Trump, hallelujah. Remember that? I've been such a source of pride for him. Who doesn't want to show something they're proud of during an election year? That's what all the candidates do. So for him to highlight me, it makes me know he's not only proud, he's super proud. And people keep trying to get her to say bad things about Trump, right? Oh, she has to say bad things. She's black, he's racist, say something bad about him. And she said, no, it's out of the question. She said, could you imagine turning on someone who saved your life? She said, just on a personal level, could you imagine that? Even Kim Kardashian praised the president for making not only criminal justice a priority, but also for making it the Super Bowl ad. Again, we've been saying that Trump's going to get 10-15% of the black vote. Dave Rubin predicted something more like 30%. That's kind of where I'm hanging out right now, something like 30% of the black vote. And the Democrats are in absolute full panic mode. And there's still like 260 or something days to go. It's going to be so much fun. It's going to be fun to see what the Democrats have up their sleeve as their final desperation play. Because surely they got nothing now. Slater Crusaders, hope you have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you back on Monday. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word.